ago. Rich Cohen, you are a nonfiction author of, I have here by my accounts, 9 books. You will correct me on that. You are also a journalist and a contributing editor for Vanity Fair and Rolling Stone magazine, and you're also a screenplay writer. And today we're here to talk about your latest book, Pee-wee's, Confession of a Hockey Parent. Rich, welcome to the show.
Thank you for having me.
So, Rich, this is something, especially here in Canada, families devote almost the whole existence to their kids' hockey game. It happens, and we're talking about hockey today, but it happens the same for parents who are involved in soccer, baseball, football, and this is the first time I ever see someone writing about it. So I just think it's a topic that is concern many parents. They see themselves in the story that you wrote about your son.
Right. Well, I grew up playing hockey, and then I went away from hockey for a long time. You know, I played adult hockey, but I wasn't involved in the same way. And then I moved out of New York, about 50 miles out of New York, and I happened to live right near a hockey rink. I have 4 boys, and I started them playing hockey. And my own father wasn't really very involved in my hockey career, and I kind of looked down on or made fun of the parents that kind of lost their sense of perspective over it. And I became example number 1 of completely, I didn't realize how intense and how all-consuming it was and how into it I would get and how I would know, like, intellectually, like I should, like, you know, dial it down. But as soon as I got into the rink, I just lost it again all over again. So, and it was such an intense experience. And also, it was so exciting watching the team. I mean, you wouldn't think watching, 11-year-olds would be as exciting for me as watching my favorite hockey team was the Blackhawks, but it was way more exciting because when it's your kid, it's a completely different thing. And it was all unbelievable to me, the highs of it and the lows of it and the intensity of tryouts and the fear of being left behind and what team's your kid going to make. And you realize you're always going around talking about, well, how's our team? How did we do? As if like, I didn't do anything. I'm not on that team. I'm just a parent in the stands, but it completely becomes your identity.
You are the taxi driver.
Right.
Yeah. Let me ask you, before we get any further, could you tell us a little bit about your background? I mean, you have written all these books, you write, you contribute to all these magazines. So how do you get started in this business of writing?
Well, I was always interested in writing and reading when I was a kid, and I didn't know what to do after I got out. I went to college in New Orleans, and I didn't know what to do after, and I got a job as a messenger at the New Yorker magazine. And I didn't really even know what the New Yorker magazine was, and I didn't do it with the intention. I just started killing time until I figured out what I wanted to do. And actually, one thing that they had me do was I was a receptionist sometimes, and the receptionist wasn't there. They had me answer the phones. And it was mostly nothing happening. So I started reading the magazine because I was sitting there, and I thought it was great. And I thought the nonfiction was great. And I got completely into it. And then I started to try to write stories. And then it just so happened that one of the editors of the magazine, he had a weekend hockey game he played in New Jersey on a pond near his house. And people heard I played hockey, so I got dragged along, and I got to know him and all these writers by just driving back and forth. And then I started to try to write, and then it just kind of went from thing to thing to thing. I got these little stories published in the New Yorker, and then I got a job at a little newspaper, and then I got a job at Rolling Stone where I was very young, and I got very good story assignments because I was so young, and they wanted to have me cover people who were the same age as me. So like young rock stars, they'd send me out because I was the same age, and then I just sort of, whatever has interested me, I've been able to write about pretty much, and then, do other journalism just to explore things on a smaller level or make money to live, basically.
Right, and you were always willing to take an assignment. I mean, in this case, the assignments were given to you because you were young, but you were just ready to write something, right?
Yeah, well, one of the things I did at the New Yorker early on is they said they needed somebody to go to England. Nobody could just go to England, and they said to me, "Do you have a passport?" And I have a passport. They said, "Can you go home right now, get your passport, go straight to the airport and fly to England?" That's what I got, and I was the only person around there who had absolutely no commitments, no connections, nothing to do. If they give me the money to get to the airport, I will go to England, without even telling anybody. So early on, and I did a whole bunch of stories about the Rolling Stones, which meant the band, which meant leaving, the city that night and being away for a month. I was always willing to do all that stuff. So And I remember once early on, there was a flood, a nor'easter in New York. And I was so determined to like go figure out what was going on that I was wading around in water, like up to my stomach. And a cop's like, "What are you doing?" And I said, "Oh, it's okay. I'm writing a story." He's like, "You're going to get electrocuted and die. Then no one's going to care about your story."
Wow. Okay. So now going back to Pee-wee's, one of the critiques that I hear from time to time is that parents are not allowing their kids to live their childhood. And, you know, whether it's hockey or piano lessons or violin or football, I, there's this critique that kids should be allowed to just be kids and play in the ground with other kids without this pressure of having to perform. And personally, I wish my parents would have given me some of that pressure because I turned out to be a very nasty child. So I don't know where you stand in that field.
Well, I don't know exactly how it is there compared to here. I mean, Quebec, I imagine it's much more intense. I mean, it's the hockey capital of the world, but I think part of what's happened is a lot of kids are so scheduled. Okay, so for hockey, we used to, on the weekends, we didn't have to do anything. So we could spend the entire weekend skating and playing on the park, which they froze in the winter. We play like 20 hours of just no coaches, no parents, just playing pickup games. And then during the week, we go to our team. So we got all this time to skate and to practice. And now there's such competition for ice time, for ice space, that every minute on the ice has to be productively used. So it's like making up for what's missing, which is just the free skating time. And also there's just so many more people and everything's so much more competitive and so much more intense that it just puts pressure on everybody. And this fear of, you know, being on the right team, and it just seems more important than it used to. Like when I was a kid, I was on a travel hockey team, but it wasn't that big a deal. And we just had AA and A, and you mostly just stayed with the same kids your whole life, and you'd move A to A to AA, all the way up to high school. And, you know, sometimes a kid went ahead or got held back for whatever reason, but mostly it was because the idea was you could have these tryouts, but they're not going to tell you that much, you know, because you can't tell in 3 hours what coach could tell in a whole season, and kids progress by leaps. But now the tryouts have become so important, and there's limited space, that making the right team becomes like it comes to feel like parents like succeeding or not succeeding in life.
Wow.
And it becomes like college. I mean, my older son is applying to college right now. That should be a bigger deal than hockey, but the hockey tryouts seem like a much bigger deal to me than the college applications, you know, and that's something wrong with me, but also because the pressure is so intense. And then here, you know, the team that your kid makes, it's just like, when you grow up and have kids, you discover that you don't make new friends. Your kids choose your friends for you by who their friends are. You end up hanging out with those people. And if your kid was a year older, you'd have a completely different group of friends. And so for hockey, which team your kids make, those are the parents you're going to almost live with for a year. So if your kid doesn't make the top team, you're not with the top parents anymore. That's what it kind of feels like. But it ends up having a huge, you end up moving. It has a huge effect on your life, you know. And there are people that are much better at this, who, like, you know, like I'm a reasonable person, and I know it's stupid, but I can't help but do it. You know, I can't help but get swept up and carried away in it. And writing this book is part of the reason I wrote the book, is because I found myself getting so carried away that I wanted to read a book. I wanted some kind of guide, and I looked for it. I looked for it in all the sports, because to me, it didn't matter. If a football parent would have the same issues, a parent whose kids competitively dance, which is so competitive here, would have the same issues. But I couldn't find that book. I felt like it didn't exist. So I kind of wrote it.
Right. But my question is, aren't parents robbing their kids out of their childhood? I mean, if your kid, let's say your kid is in this competitive sport, right? But one day he wants to do something else. He wants to climb a mountain, or he wants just to watch TV the whole day. You know, that wouldn't be possible if he has to be constantly training. So he's not allowed to be a kid. He has to be right away almost a professional athlete, without getting to do the things that maybe he would like to do differently.
I agree with that completely. I mean, that is a problem. And like, my son plays different sports, and in the summer for like 2 months, he goes swimming, he goes hiking, he goes sailing. fishing. And I do it partly just because you can grind a kid down with hockey. You'll make them hate hockey or whatever sport it is if you train them like they're a professional athlete. And partly because I actually think it makes them better athletes, because it's like letting yourself heal and recover, and then they really want to play.
Right.
And then you're like holding them back, they want to play. So
Right.
I think that that's actually a better way to develop a player or whatever, a person, a human being, and makes them more rounded. And also the other thing is, like, my son is not going to play college hockey, I don't believe. And he's definitely not going to play pro hockey. He's just not at that level. He's good at his level. So this idea that so much of parents are training their kids for a future, and that's never going to happen. I mean, it's right. Their hockey career is right now. And if it's all focused on where they're going to be next year, they're missing it. They're missing it as it's happening. And when you're a kid and think back on your hockey time, you think back on your friends, you think back on, being in the locker room. And I know that his favorite thing, he'll tell you, is when they go to tournaments and they stay in hotels. It's the hotel buffet is his favorite thing about playing hockey.
Right. And one thing that I have seen, I saw this with a family. They are my friends. And this family, the kids, they train their kid to be a professional football player. So ever since he was a little boy, because his father was a football player, he's been on training, and the whole family focused on that. And here came out the tryouts, and he didn't make it. It's just like the whole family crumbled. They didn't know what to do. They lost their whole identity. They didn't even know what to call themselves.
Yeah, that's too bad. I remember trying out. I wanted to be a pitcher on the baseball team, and my father and I practiced in my backyard for like 2 weeks. And then we went to the tryouts. We realized we'd set the mound up like 10 feet too close, and all my pitches were bouncing like 10 feet in front of the plate.
Wow.
So I don't know. I mean, the thing about it is you want to be somebody who can like be a generalist, because you never know what life's going to throw you. And there's going to be teams that you don't make all the time. And my first big lesson in hockey was when I tried out for a team and didn't make it, and it was, and I expected to make it. I thought I should make it. And that was like a good thing, because it taught me that it's not the end of the world, and you make it next year, or something else happens, or something else comes along, and you can never really tell what's going to be good for you in the end. And the fact is that any hockey career, any sport, any kind of career is made up with a whole lot of losing, a whole lot of defeat and disappointment, and how you react after that, that's going to determine what kind of life you're going to have.
Okay, so your book is called Pee-wees, but not everyone knows what that means. Could you first of all tell us what that means, the different rankings there are, and tell us more or less a summary of the whole year that you spent documenting for this book?
Okay, well, basically, it's changed and it's different in some places, but the way they set up hockey, it's with 2 grade ages at a time, like 7 and 8 year olds together. And the lowest level really is mites. That's when you start. They have some stuff before that called atoms here, but mites is when you start really playing. And then you play 2 years of mites, 2 years of squirts, 2 years of pee-wees, and that's what I wrote about. That's 11 and 12 year olds. 2 years of bantams. That's like 13 and 14 year olds. Now they're getting big. 2 years of midgets. And then after midgets, you're either playing in high school, you're playing junior hockey, you're playing in the NHL. I mean, that's like how the ranks go. So Pee-wee's kind of like, they're already kind of getting big, but they're still kids. So it's an interesting year, because some kids have kind of grown and they're much bigger, and some kids are still very small and they have to compete together. And I always say to my son, like, because he's not big, it's like, if you look at the great players, and a lot of things are people that were small, that had to learn to play with a lot of skill just to survive, and then they grow later, so they have kind of, they can't rely on their size, because never going to be big, can't rely on your size. So, and the book is, I wanted to follow one season, and starting with the tryouts. It's very simple to determine the team. And they do a weird thing here where I live, which is they have the tryouts in the spring. When I was growing up, we had them in the fall. They have the tryouts in the spring, right after the other season ends. And then you sort of go away for the summer, and then you come back and reconvene. And this was a team, like all the teams here, there's one professional coach who's like a kid. He's like a 22, 23-year-old kid who played high school. Is probably, this isn't his full-time job. It's like fun and a little bit of money. And, maybe he's going to have kids himself, so he's seeing what it's like. And then 2 parent coaches who are supposed to just help out, because, overseeing like 15 kids or whatever. But the parent coaches usually have kids on the team, And that creates all kinds of problems. And it always has and always will. And I said to the coach, you know, I said at one point, you can't see your own kid objectively. It's just impossible. Nobody can. It's not an indictment of you. Nobody, there's never been a person. Your kid either looks like the greatest if you're one kind of parent, or the worst if you're another kind of parent. But you can never see them as they really are, which is probably somewhere, you know, in the middle. And then sort of this team was interesting because it was a really good team, not at even the top level of our program. They were Pee Wee A's. There was a AA team above them, but they wanted to get to the state tournament and reach the point where they could play the AA's because they felt they were better than the AA team. And it was sort of a roller coaster season of winning streaks, losing streaks, and all the lessons you get from that going into the state championship. And, you know, writing it, I had kind of my favorite movies in mind, which was the Bad News Bears and Slapshot, were movies when I came out when I was a kid. And, you know, just sort of a great, I wanted to, at the heart of it, I wanted to be like a great sports book.
Okay, I read in a book, I believe by Malcolm Gladwell, that most hockey players, the best one are born in the month of January, because since it's by age, and of course the difference of size of a kid, one born in January and the other one is born in December, is huge. So the kids born in January, they are bigger, they tackle harder, whatever, and since they are bigger, they get more attention from the coach, and they tend to develop faster or better than the smaller kids.
Right. Well, I moved out. You're talking about the book Outliers, I believe.
Yes.
That's Outliers. Yes. And I moved here from the city, and I found that book has had more influence and has probably made sports less fun than anything else, because he also says to be a master at anything, you got to practice for 10,000 hours. So what he doesn't tell you is you can practice for 10,000 hours and still not be any good at it. You know, it doesn't make you a master. So, and then the other thing is about the age thing, because when I read his book, like, I was a good hockey player when I was a kid. And then at a certain point, I went from being very good to being average, you know, to then sort of just hanging on. As I got older, kids got bigger, I was kind of small. And I read his book, I'm like, oh, that's why. It's because I have a late in the year birthday. It sort of excused it to me, like, but then I started doing, and I started looking up people like Wayne Gretzky has like a birthday. I don't remember when it is, but it's like January, February. Mark Messier, sometime early in the year. But then I started looking up some other players. True, you know, there are players that were born in July, August, September, and it's sort of the age thing is different than Like when we do our cutoffs, we don't do them in January. I think our cutoffs are like in November. So that would scramble everything, you know? Right. So I sort of think what Malcolm Gladwell kind of did was he had a thesis, and then he looked for evidence of the thesis. Yeah. But yet a lot of people have based, you know, they want their kids, a lot of people hold their kids back in school, so they'll be the biggest. They'll have the most confidence, you know? But if everybody holds their kids back, then you're right back where you started, except everyone's basically lost a year of their adult life. And so I think it's all these intangibles. The most important thing for somebody to be a good hockey player when they're young is they got to love hockey. Right. And it's amazing how many times you go out there and there's kids playing who are physically good and they have all these qualities, but they're not great players because they don't really want to be there, you know? And it's the kids that want to be there. And usually the coaches pick up on that as much as size, like who's out there going as hard as they can. And those kids get noticed by the coaches, and those kids get extra attention and all that. But it's like, you know, it's a struggle. It's always a struggle.
Well, in regards to the Malcolm Gladwell book, do you think a lot of authors are guilty of data mining? They have a thesis and then they search the data that confirm the thesis, and then it's presented like true fact?
I don't know, but I do know. I don't know. I have no idea, because I'm not that kind of writer, but I do think that when anything makes too much sense, you should be very skeptical, you know, because things usually don't make sense like that. There's not a key that explains everything, you know. So, and when things confirm too much to what you already think going in, like if like, oh, I thought this and it's exactly like that, you should be pretty skeptical of that too. So the main thing is, like, you can make these big trends, but when they play hockey, it's the kids on the ice, and then it's an individual thing, and none of that stuff matters.
Okay, so Rich, what is your main message for parents with this book?
Well, I put it at the beginning of the book. It's my father always said to me, which is a key to a good, successful life is to care but not that much.
Yes,
My
I
message
remember.
is you should care, but not that much. It's just hockey.
Right,
It's
and
hockey, but it's just hockey. Just, you
is-
know,
and have fun with it. And it's,
yeah.
yeah, okay,
And
great.
let your kid have fun. And remember what your kids, looking back, like in 20 years, how do you want to look back on it? You want to look back on it, it's great time you spent with your kid. That's it.
Right, right. Okay, so Rich, can you tell us one more time the title of the book and where people can find it?
It's called Pee-wee's Confessions of a Hockey Parent. You can find it on Amazon.com and local bookstores and BarnesandNoble.com. It's pretty much everywhere.
Rich, thank you so much for your time.
Thank you.